Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching. And I'm joined today by Anna Taylor, who, as you will have probably seen in my post, decided to go down the route of using a sperm donor and having IVF to conceive her lovely daughter, Eadie, because she was single in her mid-30s and just did not want to miss out on the option of becoming a parent. So she's kindly agreed to talk to us about what that was like, and all, I mean, we can all imagine the roller coaster of emotions that you must have gone through. And Anna works as a childminder coach, so she's helping childminders, usually who, like her, have come from the teaching background and or have worked for a long time in nurseries, and she can tell us a little bit more about her background and what she's doing now. So welcome, Anna. Thanks for coming to talk to me. And do you want to start by just giving us a bit of background on where you were at when you started to get the idea that this is what you were going to have to do?
Yeah, sure. So at the time I was living in London and managing a nursery school there. And I had just come out of a relationship and was just in that stage where I was just very conscious of my own fertility, and that time was becoming not on my side. And it didn't, and I wasn't in a relationship, but desperately wanted to have a family. And so I started looking into becoming a solo parent and doing a bit of research. And funny enough, I guess until I came to that point, there was just such a lot of sadness and I guess grief for what I thought I was missing out on. And actually, the moment I made the decision to go down this track, everything just suddenly felt calm and right. And there was still a roller coaster, because obviously there is during the treatment process, but decision wise, it just felt like the right thing to do. So
was it something that somebody suggested to you, or did you just think of it yourself?
I had been thinking about it. I was on the sort of more of the late 30s side of mid 30s. And so it had been something I'd been thinking about, I guess more so at the beginning, just thinking about having my fertility checked and whether I went down the process of freezing eggs. That was kind of where I'd gone to at that point. And then I remember one day just feeling really low and went for a walk with my sister, and my sister was just like, just do it on your own. You can do this. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, I can do this. And I contacted the DCN, which is the Donor Conception Network, and went to one of their conferences and the fertility show and the alternative parenting show, I don't know. And they all had talks on solo parenting via donor sperm or double donor, double with eggs as well. And every time I went to one of those talks, I just was like, everyone looks normal, and like, everyone just looks like me. And that was really exciting, because it kind of just made it seem more attainable and not so strange. I kind of, so that made it sort of seem like something I could do. And so I just kept taking the steps and moving on in the process. So then it was sort of choosing a clinic. I did that first, and then once I'd had that consultation and kind of knew the direction that I wanted to go, so first of all I chose to try with IUI, and firstly non-medicated, so just tracking my normal cycle. I mean, one of the questions that you'd said about what do I wish I'd known? I definitely wish I had known more about my cycle and my fertility and that kind of information, because I really knew nothing apart from how not to get pregnant, which was sort of the most the most I knew about it. And so definitely was a crash course in sort of learning about hormones and all of that kind of stuff.
Was that something that you had to kind of just find out all by yourself, or did the clinic provide any of that information to you?
No, the clinic. No, the clinic. No. Well. I mean, I don't remember that they did. And it's sort of like a whole new language. So I definitely had to do research on my own as well. Mm-hmm. And quite early on, I linked in with other women that were going through this process or had just gone through it. So were either pregnant or had a young baby.
Yeah. So were they people that you met through Facebook groups or through the clinic or the conferences?
To start with, they were people. I met one person from the forum on the DCN network website, which at that point was very basic. And we met up in person because we lived near each other. And then she started a Facebook group, and that sort of grew. And also, when I went to see my GP, my GP said, "Oh my goodness," and I told her what I was doing, because as a solo parent, there wasn't anything that I could access via the NHS. I had to do it all privately. But I went to speak to my GP just to let them know what I was doing. And she said, "Oh my goodness, another one of my patients has just done this, and she has a 4-month-old." So she checked whether this person would like to be in contact with me, and she gave me her number. So that was amazing, because again, it's just that feeling that you're not on your own, and other people are going through it or have gone through it, and it's always helpful if people are like a little bit further along.
Yeah, definitely. You need that kind of reassurance and sense of hope and encouragement, I'm sure. And also, because my experience of working with women on their fertility is, especially if you've got to go down the assisted reproductive route, that it can be a really lonely journey. Women feel like there's something really wrong with them, that they're broken. And maybe for you, going into this as a solo person, there's a lot of pressure, I think, to just be part of a conventional relationship and have your family that way, even though there's so many different ways that families can be created and maintained these days. And I think there's more blended families now than there are kind of traditional nuclear families, but it's still a really, really intense process, isn't it? And I think, like you said, it doesn't surprise me at all that the clinics didn't really offer any information about your hormones and so on, because that's why I do what I do, because I'm trying to plug that gap so that women can actually maybe avoid even having to go through IVF. And I mean, obviously you had to because of your situation, but in other circumstances, there's so many things that we can do to stabilize our body and our hormones and get our cycle in a really fantastic place so that we're fertile and ready to conceive. And I think that a lot of women end up kind of not wasting months, but months go by once they've made that decision, like, this is what I want to do. And then they have to go through all these tests, and then they discover that maybe something's amiss and they've got to work on that and resolve it. And so then that's added pressure, isn't it? Because the clock's ticking and you want to get on with it. So how old were you when you actually went through your first round of trying?
I think I was 37, and I did so I had 3 lots of IUI.
So just could you just explain to people watching what that means, because some people won't know?
Well, as the as the midwife told me in my first appointment, it's basically the turkey-based method. So I was like, no, it's not quite. But so it was. So the first one was non-medicated, but they basically just track your cycle and insert the sperm at the point that they decide. And I think that very much felt like a shot in the dark. I felt so out of control of it. And then you can have varying degrees of support with that, with medication. And I think, I'm so bad at remembering these things, but I think I had 2 unmedicated IUIs where they just tracked the cycle and I had a go. And then the third one was a medicated IUI, which went a bit pear-shaped because I produced too many follicles,
right,
which for an IUI wasn't what they wanted. And all of it's hard because you're finding out that something hasn't worked and you're straight away into the decisions for the next cycle. And it's just, the pace is really hard. And like you were saying about it can be lonely. Obviously, I did it on my own. The first couple of cycles, I didn't want anybody to know because you don't want to have to deal with other people's anticipation and then disappointment as well. It's hard enough dealing with your own. But actually, after the first 2, I kind of thought I do need more support for this. So I told then at that point a close group of friends and family. So
to the outside world at that time, were you just kind of presenting as like, well, I'm just single at the moment and just living my life, and as if nothing was happening? And
and trying to teach.
It's sort of double life, really, isn't it? Which
is it's really hard. And I think at the point, I guess there were 2 stages. At the point where I had to then, so the 4th attempt, I decided to go for IVF, and I had a break of a month in between those. And at that point, I had to tell work and people at work and things like that because it impacted then.
So can we just go back a minute to what was it like, and how do you choose who's going to be your sperm donor?
Oh, yes.
That's like the critical part, isn't it?
It was, I guess with the whole thing, it went in stages, and it feels like every decision is a huge decision until you've made it, and then you get the next decision to make. And definitely at the choosing a donor stage, it did feel like a big decision. And there were a couple of ways there are a few ways that you can go. So I definitely wanted to go down the clinic route so that I knew that there was a degree of structure and protection around the whole process.
What would be the alternative then?
So the alternative is using a known donor.
Right, of course.
Which is usually done. I mean, I did not go down this track, but I think it's done in like on Facebook groups and those kind of ways. And sometimes it's just using sperm from bloke on a Facebook group, and other times it can be done naturally, but through that same process.
Because I don't know if you've seen it, but only yesterday by chance I came across a program on E4 called Strangers Making Babies. And have you seen it? And
no.
And they're basically, I think probably exacerbated by lockdown and stuff, all these people that have not been able to go out and find a partner in the normal way have just decided to take part in this sort of experiment where they get matched with somebody else who wants to become a parent, and then they have to navigate this whole thing about, because they want to co-parent this child. And I just thought it was fascinating because one of the couples, it was a woman and a gay guy, and he lived in Manchester and she lived in Reading and then had decided during lockdown to move to Cornwall to be near her parents. So even though they matched really well and they shared the same values and outlook, and they felt like, yeah, I'd be happy for this other person to be the co-parent, they've got that dilemma of, well, we're going to have this massive distance between us, and how is that going to work when you're trying to sort of bring up a child? And it did sort of beg the question, like, well, why wouldn't you just go it alone if you're, if that's one of the biggest obstacles? But then I suppose there's like quite a strong desire to have another parent in the life.
Yeah, I think it comes from that. I think it comes from that strong and that societal pressure to have two parents involved in the family.
Yeah.
And it comes from a good place. Sometimes it comes from a financial necessity as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, co-parenting in a relationship where you've had children together and then your relationship fails and you co-parent, at the best of times, co-parenting is really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Trust
so
me.
I can't imagine how that must be in those kind of very complicated situations. And although having a child using donor sperm has its complications, there are things that are uncomplicated about it. Eadie has one parent, legal parent, that's me. Obviously she is made up with the DNA of two people, one of whom being the donor, who she will be able to contact in time if she does want to. But at this point, she has one parent. That's how our family looks. And, if I meet somebody else, then I will, there's that chance to have a relationship with somebody else. I'm no longer in that point where I'm sort of looking at people wondering how long it's going to take to make a baby, because that bit's separate. It's done, and it's very clear. And by going down the route of using a donor through a clinic, Eadie's protected, the donor's protected, and we're all protected by that legal framework of that he will be contactable, that she has information, that we have a degree of health protection through testing, pre-testing and things like that.
Yeah. And can you just explain a bit, because I remember last time we talked that you were saying how, am I right in recalling that clinics in the States, those donors can be used as many times as they want?
Kind of. So each country, generally each country has a limit as to how many times the donor can be used, family limits rather than child limits. So for example, in the UK, one donor can be used for 10 families. In the States, each state, I think, has their own limit. So, a donor could be used multiple times in different states. And some sperm banks use donors from the States and import the sperm in. I decided to, generally, if you use a Scandinavian donor or an American donor, I think even in the European sperm bank, you get an awful lot of information. Sometimes you get like examples of their voice, like voice messages, or
really? Wow.
Photos of them as babies. You don't get any information whereby you could identify the donor. But you get to know their favorite color and things like that. And at the very beginning, that's what I thought I would want, like as much information as I could get, because I guess it's still that trying to take a bit of control in a situation I don't have much control over. And actually, as the decision came closer and closer, I realized that actually what I wanted was a healthy child and and that was really and a sort of a safe framework to have her in it. So I decided to go for a UK donor, and I did get some information, sort of hair color, weight, educational background, I think career, nationality, and then they had a thing where sort of 3 sentences, clinic's impression, because it's actually quite a big commitment that donors go through since the law changed, I think in 2005. I can't remember where, that made all donors identifiable as a child turns 18. You know, that's a big commitment for a donor to make, but also the process of going through the health tests, and they have to, you know, have quite a lot of contact with the clinic for quite a long time. So it's a big commitment, and it would sort of say so was always friendly to the staff, and you know, that kind of thing. So it was, you know, a little bit helpful, but really, you know, they're not going to come in and be that rude. So it gave
no, but it's quite interesting, because I mean, I'm assuming, but I'm thinking, if I was in your shoes or anybody's shoes doing this, that you'd be kind of constructing an image in your head of what you think this person looks like and what your child might turn out to look like. And yeah, I think in the past there was probably a bit of a feeling like, oh, it's just something that guys can do to make a bit of money, or, you know, they're just totally not involved, and it's just a sort of quite clinical
process.
But actually, you know, maybe some of these guys, like if they are required to sort of, because you were saying as well before that the laws changed now. So when we were growing up, sperm donor children couldn't meet their donor parent, could they? And now they can. So when they turn 18, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So when they turn 18, that information's held, and they can contact the HFEA, which is kind of like the governing body, I suppose, for that information. And so we've not reached the stage yet. I can't remember when the law changed, but we've not quite reached the stage yet where the first lot of children from those identifiable donors have turned 18. So I think it's in another 3 years. Which is why, like, one of the things I would say, if anybody was interested in going down that route or wanted to find out more, is the Donor Conception Network is a really good place to start for information, because they're really they were really ahead of their game. They're just a small charity. They started about 20 years ago, and their motivation was always that children should know, and that children should be given that information. And donor conceived children, and now adults, that their sort of story has gone through a similar story to adoptive children, but sort of, I guess, 20 years on. And whereas it was, you know, at first a secret, very much a secret. And especially parents in heterosexual relationships using donor sperm or eggs were told, you know, nobody needs to know. But the DCN very much is about giving children the information, and that's why I'm open also about my story and the choices that I've made, because I feel like I'm breaking the ground for Eadie, for you know, doing some of those awkward things, so that then by the time she's grown up and by the time she's an adult, that it will be just a much more normal conversation to be had with people.
Yeah, I think that is one of the best things about what you've done and what you're doing, is how beautifully transparent you are, and you know, you really are paving the way for other people to ask questions as well, because it's the sort of thing that with the British stiff upper lip, and we don't sort of talk about things, and people, well, I think some people are quite rude and forward and would ask the awkward questions, but you know, for most people we just wouldn't have a clue what the process is like and how to go about finding out about it. And you're the first person that I openly know of who's had a donor conceived child, so I haven't even had the opportunity to talk about it to anyone before and what it's like. And it's I'm curious to know how have you sort of let that process unfold with Eadie as she's got older, because she's 6 now, isn't she?
So, yeah, she's 6, and
I got one of those. I know what it's
she's
like.
6. She knows a lot.
Yeah.
But joking aside, I started talking to her about it when she was a baby, before she could understand. I learned very quickly that because I am a solo parent, I felt judgment when she was a baby when I told people that I didn't have a partner, and I felt the sadness coming from people towards us, and so I was motivated to tell my story because there was no sadness. Nobody, you know, we were a family of 2. There was so much joy. She was, you know, a hard to come by baby, and I didn't want her to see those. I didn't want her to see people's faces fall when when they found out she didn't have a dad.
Do you feel like it was sort of pity that they were?
Yeah, and I think because, like you, people haven't. I think the assumption is there's a mum on her own with a baby. Obviously, in our heteronormative society, there was a man involved who's left, and that wasn't the case. So, you know, even from sort of toddler groups, I think she was about 5 months old, I took her to the first toddler group and had this experience. And so I explained that I'd had her as a solo parent through IVF with sperm, donor sperm, which, you know, and now, I mean, it was awkward. It wasn't what I planned to say when I went to the toddler group. But, you know, so I started off telling my story when she didn't really understand, I guess. And then I've just dealt with it as I do with everything else. And I sort of give her as much information as she needs at the time. And we add to that. And I'm always amazed. The other thing I'd say is a lot of my friends, I have a lot of friends now who are also solo mums to donor conceived children. So they see each other, they see us, we talk to each other about the wording that we use. And I set up a support group on Facebook, and now there are 450 women in there who are solo mums to donor conceived children. And that is a massive help to me because, you know, someone else has gone through that. Why doesn't Eadie have a daddy question on play dates? And you have a little, you're never quite prepared for when it happens and the weird situations that come up. But you've got a little bit of an idea about the wording you can use. And that's been a journey that's changed as Eadie's grown and as sort of research comes out and as I sort of tap into different networks. Is to, you know, for example, at the beginning I was very adamant that that she had a donor and not a dad, and now I'm very much thinking about that wording, and that I used a donor, she didn't. And also there is a person who is her biological father. You know, I went to a really good conference by the DCN, and there was a guy that spoke at that, and he was saying how in English we have such a limited number of words that describe family relationships, and that in different languages there would be other words that describe, you know, somebody who's more than a cousin but not a sibling, or, you know, those kind of variations in relationships. So I kind of think, but at the moment that is the word that best describes him.
And so, how would Eadie describe the dynamic, or the
I think she usually, well, interestingly, it's funny because she's in year 1 now, so she's halfway through the second year, although they've had a weird schooling. And I don't live in London anymore, I now live in Salisbury, so it isn't as diverse a community as it would have been if I was still in London. And that was definitely a consideration when I moved here. But interestingly, although they know that she has a mum, she only has one parent. As soon as, it's often literally as they come across the threshold, they have to sort of get more information on it, and it's just that young children are so honest and open, and for them it is unusual that Eadie doesn't have a dad, and I completely respect that. But I have to fight that urge to protect Eadie, but also let her have her space to answer these questions. And usually they ask her. And I heard her friend say, "So do you have a daddy?" And Eadie said, no, I don't have a daddy, I have a mummy." "Yes, but do you have a daddy?" "No, I don't have a daddy. He didn't die or anything. I just don't have a daddy." It's like, I don't know where that came from, but maybe, and I had to stop myself from diving in and giving like a big explanation, because actually she'd handled it fine. And he didn't die or anything makes me think that maybe she's been asked that a lot at school, and that.
Well, you know what? I just think kids absorb stuff and learn stuff way earlier than we think they will. And, you know, while you're talking, I'm remembering occasions when, you know, Craig's asked me age sort of 4, like, where do people go when they die, and what will happen to me, and how are babies made, all of that. And I was thinking, I didn't have that down until he was at least 10.
Yes.
Like, hold on, this isn't part of the plan. But in fact, we know some people who are a same-sex couple who've had 2 children through obviously sperm donation as well. And I remember, again, when Craig was very young, he might have only been 3 or something, saying to me, why don't they have a daddy? Where's their dad? And it really fascinated me, because up to that point, we'd pretty much only ever. So I've been divorced since he was 18 months old. So he has no memory of him being in a family unit. And all the people that we met up with on play dates, you know, it would just be the mum and the kids. And so he hadn't even really that much been exposed to, you know, the sort of family setup. And yet he clocked that these 2 boys don't have a dad in the picture. And I just thought it was so interesting, because, again, but I suppose, like you've said, that, you know, all our cultural influences and references, the stories are about families with a dad and a mum, and you know, we've got to do more, haven't we?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It's environmental, and it's that you know, they absorb it. And one of the things, as an educationist, I've always been so committed to diversity and making sure I had reflective stories and things like that. But actually, it wasn't I didn't need stories that explain about how families can be different. And I didn't really need a story that explained about donor conception. I needed stories that were just stories that reflected our family, so that when Eadie could look at it, she looks at, funny enough, we went to Peppa Pig World on Tuesday, and it was our first sort of trip out for a long time in our new normal.
Yeah.
And it was great, like it was really well signposted and etc. etc. But they had a sign, and I noticed it, funny enough, in Legoland when we went in the summer, when that opened up, of keep your respect the 2 meter distance. And the sign is a mum, a dad, and 2 children. And it was at Legoland, and it was at Peppa Pig World, all over. Yeah. And how easy would it be to have made 3 signs or 4 signs, with a solo parent or just a non-gendered adult? It's those kind of things that say.
And in fact, a year or 2 ago, the school pre-COVID was setting up some sort of event evening, and they had basically individual ticket or a family ticket, and you got a discount. And I had an argument with the gym I used to go to, because they had a couples discount, which is just standard in the gym industry. But how unfair is that? Like, why do you have to be in a relationship to get money off? It's
very unfair.
Yeah, anyway, well, let's not go down that route. Yeah, so that's interesting, and I am imagining, like with parenting, that stuff changes all the time, doesn't it? And what you would say to a child at 4 changes at 6 and at 10, and maybe there'll come a point when she's older when she doesn't like to say that there's no dad, and she might say, oh yeah, my dad died, or he's just, my parents split up or something. Maybe she won't. Maybe it'll be such a thing in society by then that nobody bats an eyelid. And because also, when earlier in this conversation, I was thinking, when you were saying about the judgment that you felt from people, it made me realize that although loads of people are divorced, there are times when I would say my son's dad rather than my ex-husband, because it somehow takes a bit of, do you know what I mean? Like,
there's
certain situations where I feel like it says something about me to just go, oh yeah, I'm divorced, rather than, I'd rather put the focus on the fact that, oh, we're just not together, and we're in a different situation. And so I think that's quite hard, because that's something that you can't really get away from, can you, at this point? And maybe when, if you end up in a new relationship, then you'll probably have to have the conversation of, oh no, Eadie's not this person's child. And that's another new conversation. But anyway, all in good time. So just to you had those like IUIs that didn't work, and then you went down the IVF route, and that was the one that did work. And do you feel like do you get much support from the clinic as well through the pregnancy or anything, or is it just like, okay, you're pregnant, off you go, good luck? Right.
It was a conveyor belt. It was very much, come in, we'll do this, pay on the way out. We take all credit cards, that kind of thing. But I had started off at another clinic, which was much more sort of caring and lovely, but their timescales were just so rubbish that I was losing months and months waiting for a counselling appointment, which was the gatekeeper for everything else. And so I actually moved to the clinic that I went to, London Women's Clinic, and it was much more not touchy-feely, kind of a conveyor belt, but they're good at what they do, and their success rates were high. So it was like I was saying about the decisions, you make the decision. I thought that the other place would be good, and then it wasn't, so you make another decision. When I had the IVF, I went in for the egg collection, and was expecting, again, because you just don't really know what to expect, I was thinking, well, I'll get loads of eggs, and then I'll be able to freeze some, and then I'll be able to have number 2 further down the line, and I'll have a really big chance, and la la la. And it came out of the egg collection and came round, and they'd only got 2 eggs, which was a massive shock because I'd had a lot more follicles, and I was absolutely devastated. But both of the eggs took, and both got to 3 days, because usually there's kind of a fallout at each stage. So I actually decided to have them both put back in. So both embryos were put back in at day 3. And I fell pregnant with 1 child. So, although I thought when I went, because I was like, oh gosh, I mean, twins would be stressful, and when I went for the scan at that point, because the scan is at 6 weeks, the first scan, it still looks like 2 sort of holes. And I was like, she was like, no, it's not twins, it's just the egg sac. I was like, okay. Yeah, so it was just 1. But yeah.
So, I mean, without like asking you to dredge up awful memories or anything, what was the hardest and worst part about what you've been through?
I think, do you mean the treatment or being a solo parent?
Well, both really, I suppose. Yeah.
I think that with the treatment, it was just managing my emotions, and I guess a similar thing carrying on is that I have to make all of the decisions, all of them, all by myself. There's nobody else that's invested in any of the decisions. Obviously, I've worked hard at creating a big network and support around myself because I've had to. But there's still, and I can talk through some decisions, but, I can't talk through which is the best TV to get next, or, I have to do all of those decisions as well as the big stuff, but also all the little stuff. And just taking all of that mental load as a solo parent, I find that hard, especially there isn't, I'm not even in a co-parenting situation, it is just me. And there are sometimes those things that I find still a little bit sad when I am the only parent at the nativity, and other parents have come and saved loads of seats, and there's just me, and there's like a moment of sadness, but it's massively outweighed by the absolute joy of having her. And I just after I'd had her, I think I saw a post from that Humans of New York, and it was a woman who had about a 4-year-old by sperm donation, and she said, somebody said to her, "Oh, you're so brave, is it hard?" And she said, yes, it's hard, but not as hard as it would be not to have her. And that's exactly how it's always felt, like being a parent, however you do it, like especially if you've struggled to get pregnant, and then if you've struggled to stay pregnant, it's hard. I don't think anyone finds it easy, but the joy that we have, and we have a lovely relationship, and she'll make a great adult if she gets
yeah. And I completely agree, because some people watching will know that I didn't have my son till I was 39, and he's my one and only little sunbeam in life, and it's just a blessing to be a parent, and a privilege, and I, in all the hard moments, you just think to yourself, but this will pass, because nothing stays the same. And I think the joy does really outweigh any of the tough moments, and like everything, I think I do sort of benefit from co-parenting. My ex and I have a 50-50 arrangement, so you know, half the time my son's away with his dad, and that's painful too, because I miss him, and you know, I feel sad about that. So but then I think, well, you're literally it 24/7, aren't you? And that's got to be a lot more stressful, because we all need breaks, and we all need some respite from being a parent, and just to be our self, you know, like not as the mum or the employee or the business owner or whatever, just our own self. And you know, kids take up a lot of time and energy, don't they? Concentration. And again, in the business groups that we're in, because we've met through a sort of business network, you know, I'm often seeing other mums posting that they feel exhausted and they don't know why and stuff. And I really notice a big difference in my energy levels on the days when I've got my son and when I don't. And even though we might just be doing something like going out for a walk and to the shops and then home again, it's all the mental stuff of like, oh, I've got to get lunch ready, and have I got the PE kit washed, and all of it, you know, it's just, it's a lot, isn't it? So
it is a lot. And you know, and I don't know how, because I definitely didn't order a non-sleeper, but I ended up with a non-sleeper, but as a baby she was a rubbish napper as well. So I mean, she wasn't a non-sleeper, she was just a frequent waker. But you know, our day starts at 5:30 with her, "Mummy, why do some people have sticky out belly buttons?" You know, it is literally bam. And you know, and you think about the last year, you know, it's just been me and her for a lot of the last year, and it has been really tough. But the other thing, I know you asked me at the beginning what I wish I'd known before I went down this track, and there were two things. I wish I'd known how normal it would feel, and it just feels normal, you know, and I worried about that for a long time before I went down the track. And I wish I'd known, and this is such an amazing side effect of what I've done, is I've met so many amazing women through going through this process who have done the same thing, and made some really, really good friends. And I think there's something so important if you know, doing something like this that's hard, and I guess it's the same with any kind of fertility journey, is finding people that really get it and really understand. And you don't have to explain that, you know, you've had to do all the night feeds and all the day feeds, and no one can take the baby because they only want you, and you know, all of that. You know, they understand that you don't even get to go and fill the car up with petrol on your own. You know, I had to work out which garages I could pay at the pump, because I didn't want to leave a baby in the car, and you know, all of those, they just get those kind of things. And in talking about your story with the age, and so there are so many, I'm just telling one story, and the way that it's happened for me and for Eadie. But even in the solo mum group, there are so many amazing stories of women that were told, you know, they had 1% chance of conceiving, and children, you know, a lot of women in their mid-40s, women that have had children using double donors or embryo donation. You know, there are just so many ways that we can make families, and I feel like we're so lucky. I know I told you in the last conversation, there was one thing that always sticks to me. It was at a friend's wedding, and I went over to chat to my sister, and she was chatting to a lady next to her. Now, I was pregnant with Eadie through IVF and sperm donation. My sister was trying to conceive through IVF. The other lady was in a same-sex marriage, and they were trying to conceive through IVF and sperm donation. And the bride ended up conceiving 3 children through IVF. And, you know, it's just like an amazing situation.
Yeah, it's not so unusual.
We all would have struggled, but it was just such a, you know, we're just lucky to, that's an option. So
your Facebook group that you've set up, is is that just for people who have had a child on their own, or people who are thinking about it? Or
right, so there are 2 Facebook groups that I can really recommend. One was the starting one. They're both secret, and they're both private, I think they call it now. So they're not searchable on Facebook, but I'm very happy for anybody to get in contact with me if they want more information. But they're both specifically for solo mums. The first one is for solo mums, thinkers and triers. So even if you then decide that that's not your route, that's a place that you can go and talk about. That was really handy for me at that stage. You can talk about different clinics and sperm banks and different ways of, especially sort of what you were saying at the beginning about knowing more about your hormones and all of that kind of stuff. It was great for that. And then after I had Eadie, I then set up, I guess it's kind of like a sister group, so that there was a place to talk about the things that are hard about parenting on your own with a donor conceived child, that you don't really want to talk about when people are struggling to get pregnant.
Yeah,
or,
and that's the thing, isn't it, with the fertility forums and the groups? I mean, I know there's it's very triggering, isn't it, for people to have to see other people's success, even though, I mean, you can't avoid it, unfortunately, because it's everywhere around you, isn't it? But I think I know that that's a big issue for a lot of my clients, that they just can't bear sometimes to go anywhere where they might be exposed to stories about people conceiving or whatever, and they're struggling. And it's a tricky line. And also I think what you're saying about a long time ago, I in another career, I was an adult careers advisor, and it was always just all about fact finding, gathering information, and that's still true, I think, no matter what you're doing, and particularly on a journey like this. When I work with clients on my fertility program, a lot of it is to do with figuring out what is going on with this person's cycle, what are her particular issues, and how are we going to address them. And and that's why we do testing, and also like we're saying, talking to people maybe who are in their early 40s, that if they get to the point where it's naturally not happening, what's your plan B? Are you going to give up and decide you're going to be a child? Well, I say childless, but or are you going to pursue adoption, or will you go down the donor route, whatever? And when you just don't know who to ask about what that's even like, you could feel a bit stuck, I think, and a bit isolated probably. So that's great that there's those two places. What I think I'll do is, because we've recorded this conversation, and I'm going to make it available on maybe on YouTube or as a video, so I can add your contact details at the end, so that people can just get in touch with you directly, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And
it would be good to do a link for the Donor Conception Network as well, I think. Yeah, because they're a really good signposting place.
I think I'll take a look at that just for info and knowledge.
They do training for professionals that work in fertility and things like that.
So have you got any sort of parting shot for anybody that's considering this route, of word of encouragement, or
I would honestly say, if you're thinking about it, do it. I would say it's the best thing that I've done. And all you're saying about the information gathering, it's empowering to have all of that information, and also just to focus on the next step each time. But my biggest advice is to build that network around you of people who get it, people who are slightly ahead on the journey, so that you feel that support around you. Because I mean, I don't know how, I definitely couldn't have done it without that. So they would be my 2 things. Do it, don't wait, do your research, and and get on it. So
yeah, and it sounds like there are a lot of people out there who are in the same boat. It's just we're not really exposed to them in everyday life. But yeah, I think it's the same with the people I work with, who, you know, who might be in a I mean, I would work with anybody however they're trying to have a baby, and I have got a client who's considering donor, maybe double donation now, so, you know, that'll be interesting to see how things unfold. Yeah, I think I also feel that what I'm bringing to the table as part of this is filling that gap in the process of the emotional support that's really lacking when you know, a clinic is clinical and it's pretty scientific what they're doing. And I just, you know, we're whole people, and our emotions and thoughts and feelings are every bit as important as whether you've got a physically healthy egg, and you know, one influences the other. So definitely, I do think that's a big thing to address. But anyway, well, thank you so much. It's been really fascinating.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that everything you said is going to, you know, really plant hope in people's hearts who are thinking about this, and that's really what I want to do, is just get that message out there that there really is always hope, and there are so many things that we can do to help people boost their fertility and become a parent. So I'm looking forward to keeping in touch and seeing how Eadie grows, and thank you very much, and I'll provide the details at the end of this when it goes out. So
excellent. Oh, thank you. It's been nice chatting.
Yeah, take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.